This is Night Trap. Although it looks innocent now, politicians on both sides of the aisle were blaming it and other games for the ills of society. To help celebrate Halloween, I wanted to take a look back at what game developers thought of horror games, simulated violence, and the rating system. In order to do that, I have enlisted 4 friends to reenact an interview first published in Next Generation's premiere issue. This 20-year-old roundtable discussion includes the people who worked on Doom, Time Killers, Harvester, and, of course, Night Trap. Our cast includes Jed Pressgrove, reprising his role as Tom Zito, CEO and president of Digital Pictures. Matthew Green will be playing Jay Wilbur, who worked at id Software. Adam Tabor is playing Gilbert Austin, who wrote, directed, and developed Harvester. Man, it isn't a party without Jerry Terrifying, who is playing the part of Leif Marweed, part of the team that brought you Time Killers. We'll talk more about our cast after the interview. For now, let's jump right into the conversation. Each of you have achieved considerable attention in games that have, in different ways, pushed the envelope of violent content in video games. How much of this attention is due purely to the game's violence and the interest this generates?
Night Trap was probably more successful than it should have been given how long ago we made it and how basic the level of game playing really is. It became a kind of lightning rod. It had been on sale for more than a full year before Senator Lieberman began his attack, and certainly the sales of the product accelerated tremendously during the period when it was almost impossible to turn the TV on at night and not see a 10-second clip from Night Trap.
And what do you think, Jay?
Doom was successful because all of the pieces of the puzzle were in place, and the violence is an important part of this puzzle.
Leaf, why don't you jump in here?
The violence and blood in Bloodstorm is a great attention grabber. The color red is a big flag, like stoplights and stop signs. And of course, you do want something visually big to happen when something strategic changes on screen.
Gilbert?
Sure, it will be an element in the success of Harvester. Publicity is key to the success of any product. If it's not a good game, then there's no amount of hype that will help it. But due to the nature of the game, although it wasn't conceived for this purpose, it's a happy coincidence for the marketing department that there's been all this debate in the media about violence at this time.
What led you to create this type of game? Tom?
The origin of Night Trap was that I had been negotiating with New Line Cinema to do an interactive version of Nightmare on Elm Street. We knew we wanted to do some sort of teenage slasher horror movie kind of game that would clearly appeal to the demographic we were after with an interactive TV system that we were developing. But at the last minute the deal fell apart, so Night Trap was born.
Jay, how about you with Doom?
It makes the games we want to play. It's exciting to be in the Doom environment.
And Gilbert, what about you?
I had free reign to do what I wanted, so I chose to do something original. I asked myself, what hasn't been done very well before, and the answer is horror.
So how is the controlled use of surprise, horror, and suspense useful in creating an immersive and engaging game environment?
In the most basic sense. If I'm in a house and I can go anywhere in that house at any time, then I have to have something to motivate me to move around the house. Little kids love it when their parents go out because they can look in their parents' drawers. It's a natural curiosity. Now, as a storyteller, I have to provide a motive for game players to do a similar thing. And one of the classic movie techniques of motivating people to care about characters is to present a very real threat to the characters. So we created an environment in which you had to go in every room because if you don't catch these bad guys, they might hurt somebody.
In Bloodstorm, the violence is part of the game's strategy. You can cut off arms and heads and then keep on fighting. So sometimes you do want to deliberately aim for, say, someone's weapon arm or their legs. Your opponent then has to change his or her approach as their game abilities change. A game designer wants to hit the player in every way he can and barrage their senses when they do something good. And in fighting games, it would seem that lots of blood is the way to go about doing this.
Of course, surprise and shock is important. In Doom, when you walk into a fully lit room, you see a rocket launcher right in front of you. You desire it. You grab it easily and you think, great! But then the door slams shut, the lights go out, and the creatures flood you from all sides. Now that turns the knob on the adrenaline dial up a notch. And so it's that perceived danger that makes Doom such a fun game to play.
And Gilbert, what are your thoughts?
A game is a very interactive experience, if it's done correctly. and that puts certain limitations on the designers. Playing a horror game is a whole different experience from watching a horror movie. A movie director can orchestrate all sorts of images and sequence to startle the viewer because it's linear. It's like a roller coaster. You strap the viewer in and you take them from point A to point Z, showing them exactly what you want them to see along the way. In a game, you can't manipulate the player in some way. Hence, you surrender some control over the dynamics of the situation, so you have to try other devices. So if you can't really scare someone in a horror game, then what you can do is disturb them, and that's a different kind of fear. By presenting them certain images that horrify, presenting ironic situations which are uncomfortable or disturbing.
Did you set out to scare the player, Jay?
Sure.
And what about you, Leaf?
Never. We set out to excite the player.
Gilbert?
No, I don't think you can scare someone on a PC. I want to horrify the player into a state of unease, as opposed to simply making him jump in a movie theater.
So Gilbert, can a player avoid the feeling of unease as a reward of skillful play?
No, because this atmosphere of horror is a cumulative effect of everything in the game.
Could you have achieved such a compelling game environment without the violent images?
I don't know the answer to that. Could Oliver Stone have made natural-born killers less violent? Sure, he could have, but would it have worked? I don't know.
No, because then there would have been an essential part of Doom's makeup missing. We set out to make a perfect game, and if this perfect game involved you hopping over flowers in an effort to give a daisy to a girl at the other end, then fine. If, however, it involves you picking up a shotgun, sticking it in some bad guy's mouth and blowing his brains out of the back of his head, then so be it.
Leif?
Oh yeah, from the start. That was part of the plan. If you're just selling a game to the American market, then you need lots of blood. Fine. But if you want to sell a game internationally, to countries like Germany or Japan, then these guys don't want blood. So Bloodstorm comes with dip switches to turn all the blood off, and so, of course, it has to perform in both modes. I mean, I know this makes American kids look bad, but we're pretty much the only country that likes all this blood and gore in our games.
And what do you think, Gilbert?
No, not at all. Harvester would fall to pieces without these elements. The whole concept requires horror and violence, and the game would not exist without it. Fictional horror fantasies, because, like all entertainment, there's a level of voyeurism. It enables you to live a certain terrible situation without having to deal with the consequences afterwards. It enables you to take the walk on the wild side.
In the development phase, did you consider anything to be too far? Tom?
As part of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, we acknowledged there was a level of blood and violence that was going too far. By the same token, we felt that if we completely eliminated it, the player who goes through all the build-up would feel totally cheated.
Look at it this way. In Bloodstorm, you can crawl around with no legs, dragging your intestines behind you. So no, there's nothing that we didn't put in. But there's an awful lot of black comedy in there. It's like the Monty Python Black Knight scene. It features animated characters and cartoon violence. It's definitely not real.
What about you, Gilbert?
No, there wasn't anything I shied away from. But Harvester runs the gamut of disgust and human behavior. And there are no sacred cows I considered untouchable. I've got everything from religion to children getting abducted and murdered, but I wanted to do a real horror game, not just another haunted house. And to really disturb a player in these jaded times, I think you really have to delve into some dark material. This is why there hasn't been, in my opinion, many good horror games. It's because big companies like Sierra and EA are run by corporate boards, and these guys in suits, and they try to get something truly fringe past these people. It's virtually impossible. They are forever thinking, what are these people going to think? And what if we get bad publicity? So they tone it down, and the baby ends up getting thrown out with the bathwater.
And did you run into that problem with Doom, Jay?
We have stuff here that we considered too far. Medical photographs of dismembered bodies, for example. But let me tell you, were we able to take these photographs, work them into the game, and make them an equally important part of the game, then it would have contributed and we would have used them.
So, Jay, in the future, it wouldn't draw the line at using any images on a moral standpoint. but look at it purely in terms of what it would add to the gameplay?
It's likely, yes.
Will the new ratings affect how you produce games?
We make the games we want to play, and then let the ratings fall where they will.
Gilbert?
If I wanted to dabble with horror again, I wouldn't compromise on the design for the sake of a rating, no.
And what about you, Leif?
No way.
Just to set the record straight, do you believe that exposure to violence in the form of movies or comic books or video games leads to a higher propensity for violence in the watcher or player?
I'm not a psychologist, but I believe that if you're brought up in a stable environment with a lot of love, then it doesn't make a whole lot of difference what you get exposed to. If not, I think lots of things potentially could take the place of whatever it is you are looking to your parents for and become a kind of influencing factor in your life. But it's preposterous to claim that because a kid plays a violent video game, he's going to turn into a violent person.
Playing video games is a great release of violence, and this is a belief that is echoed back to me by countless experts in the field. I would ask the people who claim that violence is caused by video games to explain the Crusades, one of the most violent periods in history, and yet these people did not have video games. So what made them do it? Their entertainment was the Bible.
There are a lot worse things that kids are exposed to, like cops and the TV news. I think kids are barraged by a lot more real violence than any pretend violence they might see in an arcade. Besides, I think video games are good for a lot of kids. It's good for reaction times, it trains your mind to think faster, and they're great training for confrontations, such as, say, a basketball game in real life. It gives that spirit of competition.
It's complete bullshit. I just want to ask these guys to look at all the violence you see in Haiti. And yet, how many of them have Nintendo decks? How many of them watch the A-Team on TV? And yet, they are happy to all show this real-life violence on TV news because they justify it by saying it's real. Therefore, it's significant. But I think ideas are significant also, and should be free for exploration.
How about the idea that what you are shocked to in real life is a function of what you are exposed to? For example, a nurse who works all day in the emergency room is less likely to be shocked by the sight of blood in a car wreck than an ordinary person. So, a player who has seen someone's head ripped off 100 times in Mortal Kombat is not going to be as shocked by the 101st time as he was on the first try. Maybe this desensitization, in some ways, transfers to real life also.
That's bullshit. I've been a newspaper reporter, I've seen decapitated people, and I guarantee you that even if I'd played Mortal Kombat all my life, it still would have shocked me.
Get real, come on. What kind of idiot would think that? Get a life.
Leif?
Kids understand what a video game is, and parents often don't give kids enough credit for this.
Growing up, I watched all the Warner Brothers cartoons. I watched genuine, dangerous things in the Three Stooges shows. I saw movies like Dirty Harry, and I haven't committed a violent act, probably since I was 15 years old in a schoolyard scuffle. I know the difference between reality and fantasy, and I think most other people do too. Okay, sure. If I see 100 horror movies, then it's going to take a serious, intense movie to gross me out. But that has nothing to do with how I react in real life.
Acknowledging the fact that there will be a link between what you see and what you do you think the risk for video game players is higher because gamers are controlling what happens instead of just watching it?
There's no difference.
The only difference is that you'll probably be less stressed coming off a really good game.
I think the interactivity heightens the positive effect, because you now understand that there is a causal relationship between doing something and something happening.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point.
It would have been a whole lot more realistic to say a total immersive VR setup, but then I think there could be profound implications of interacting with fictional horror.
Okay, end of subject. There's no proof either way, but ratings are a good thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. I hate censorship, and I would strongly defend people's right to produce whatever they wanted, but we do need something to help parents decide what their kids should or shouldn't have.
Jay?
Absolutely. I'm a consumer, and so anything that gives me more information on which to base a purchase decision is a good thing.
No, in as much as I don't think the people involved in the congressional intervention really understand. To listen to those guys talk, you'd think that they don't even have a handle on what, say, the different home systems are.
No, I have no objection to ratings as long as they aren't used to stifle creativity. We're going to voluntarily put a warning sticker on Harvester. But if ever a company denies funding for a game's development because it thinks an unfavorable ratings bracket could harm sales, then I think that's a passive form of censorship, which I'd object to very strenuously too.
Does the huge popularity of Doom, the unprecedented excitement surrounding Night Trap, and the phenomenal success of Mortal Kombat suggest that there's a huge market for violent video games that we've just scraped the surface of?
Fundamentally, in order to have a good video game, you have to have tremendous replay value. The novelty of violence will wear off. Besides, these things take a lot of money to make, and so you've got to be sure it's going to appeal to a wide enough audience. I don't think enough people would find extremes palatable.
There is a huge market for excellent games. All we have seen here is a series of great games that happen to include violence. Of course, there will always be people who exploit violence for violence's sake, and those games will probably be bad. The fact remains that Mario still sold more copies than anyone can actually count, and there's no violence in those games at all. Unless you hate mushrooms, of course.
No, because the appeal isn't international. And also, video game trends go in cycles. A couple of years back, driving games were the hot thing, and then shooting games took over. In 2 years' time, I think the popularity of fighting games will have gone away.
The number of games calling themselves horror games will grow, sure, but frankly, most game companies don't have the balls to do a real horror game and wouldn't recognize one if it bit them on the butt.
All I know is that anything I can do to take TV out of the mode of being passive and into the mode of being active is worth doing. I am much more concerned about the passivity that gets induced by television than the risks of interacting with video games.
Jay?
It's hard to say. Right now when I play Doom, I get an adrenaline rush, I get pumped, I get excited, and it's difficult to see how I could get more into a game than this. At this point, I think I'm at the height.
I agree, that's unrealistic.
If the game was as convincing as real life, then yes, of course it would have an effect, unquestionably.
And what are the chances of the trend eventually resulting in damaging or psychological, physical effects upon the player? Be it fainting, physical shock, or even post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sure, there'll be a sword fight, you'll get your head chopped off, look down and see it looking up at you with a smile on its face. It's going to be so ridiculous that you're going to laugh. It would be just like Monty Python's The Holy Grail.
I disagree. If the brain believes it's dead, then who knows what mental damage could have been done.
There's a lawsuit waiting to happen here. And so what's the legal position regarding the game publisher's responsibility in this scenario? Are you insured against this?
I go back to the Judas Priest case in which it was claimed that 2 people committed suicide after playing a song backwards. This was thrown out of court.
In the quest for ultimate realism and excitement, how far is too far?
Nothing is too far. Just whatever it takes to make a perfect game.
I agree.
Given that elements of the retail trade have already begun to balk at the shocking adult titles, to what extent is the progress of the violent genre regulated on what shops will and will not sell?
I think a good game is a good game and will be accepted by all channels, shareware and retail alike. Some obscure game in which the object is to do something really horrible might have to go underground.
There's a very real danger that any game exploring the fringe wouldn't be allowed in these stories, and so could be denied funding in the first place.
Could we be looking at a breakaway, underground sub-industry for the more adventurous titles?
I think one will pop up. But then we have one already for pornography.
For sure, but it could only exist if it was still possible to make a living from doing it. And so I urge everyone out there to pay up for their shareware games. Because without the proper support of the buying public, this system just can't operate. And it could be the future for games if the government continues to become more oppressive or the business community becomes more faint of heart and these titles are pulled from the stores.
Will you be developing further horror titles?
Oh, we'll do another horror show, for sure.
In the future, we'll keep the same taste to Doom for sure, but our main goal is to increase the scope of multiplayer options.
Oh, absolutely. If I find that in the future I have anything more to say, I love the genre.
Yes, sure. As long as they're fun, fighting games are still hot, we still enjoy making them, and the kids still love playing them.
Tom, Jay, Leif, Gilbert. Thank you. Hey, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed listening to our recreated roundtable discussion about video game violence. Head over to defunctgames.com for more insight about these gaming personalities and the types of titles they worked on. I want to thank my guests for helping me put this reenactment together. I'm going to go through them one by one and expect you to check out their websites and YouTube channels. Look, I'm counting on you. Up first, we have Jed Pressgrove playing Tom Zito. He does a lot of great work over at Game Bias, as well as a few other freelance magazines. You can find his link in the description below. Matthew Green has a website called Press the Buttons, which is a personal favorite of mine. He spends a lot of time looking at older games and the culture, mostly things connected to Nintendo consoles. Adam Tabor has his own YouTube channel, where he reviews new and old releases, as well as talks about his love for fighting games. And we can't forget about Jerry Terrifying, who is building a Mondo Cool media empire. Check out his YouTube channel, as well as the website. As always, you can find links in the description to the video. We'll be back on Sunday with a brand new episode of Online Pass, the weekly video game news quiz. So make sure and tune in for that. It's almost November, which means I have to seriously start thinking about the holiday schedule. Expect to see some announcements on that in the coming weeks. In the meantime, we recently reviewed The Park, so perhaps give that a watch if you're still in the mood for scary games. Also, make sure and click the subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.